It was a moonless night when Layla first noticed the whispers. At first, they were faint like the rustling of leaves far away, almost inaudible. But as the days passed, they grew louder, until they filled every corner of her old, creaky house. Layla had inherited the house from her grandmother, a woman who lived alone for as long as Layla could remember. The house was in a small village, isolated from the nearest city, and it had been empty for years before Layla decided to move in. She had hoped to start fresh, away from the noise and distractions of city life. But from the moment she stepped inside, something felt off. The house creaked and groaned with every gust of wind. The floorboards, old and weathered, seemed to have a life of their own, squeaking under her feet as if the house itself was trying to communicate with her. At first, Layla dismissed it as normal house settling. Old homes made strange noises, especially one as ancient as this. But as days turned into weeks, the noises became more persistent. It wasn't just the creaking of the house. It was the whispers, soft and indistinct, as though someone was standing just behind her, murmuring words she couldn't understand. She tried to ignore them, convincing herself that it was her imagination playing tricks on her. After all, she had been living alone for weeks, and the isolation was starting to get to her. But the whispers grew louder, almost pleading, and sometimes, they seemed to call her name. Layla. Layla. The voice was soft, almost sweet, but it carried an undeniable sense of urgency. Every time she heard it, her skin would crawl, and she'd spin around, expecting to see someone standing behind her. But there was never anyone. One night, after a particularly long day of unpacking, Layla sat on the old, worn-out sofa in the living room, staring at the flickering candlelight. The air was thick, and the house seemed heavier, as if it was holding its breath. That's when she heard it again. Layla. This time, it was clear. A soft whisper, followed by the sound of footsteps slow and deliberate, echoed through the room. Layla's heart raced as she jumped to her feet, looking around frantically. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized that the house was completely still, save for the sound of the whispers that seemed to be coming from everywhere. "Who's there?" she asked, her voice shaking. No answer. Just the eerie silence, followed by another whisper, closer this time. Layla's hands trembled as she grabbed a nearby candle and moved cautiously toward the stairs that led to the second floor. As she reached the top of the stairs, she stopped. The whispers stopped too. But then, from the corner of her eye, she saw something, a figure, pale and translucent, standing in the shadows of the hallway. Layla froze, her blood running cold. The figure was small, barely visible in the dim light, but she could make out its hollow eyes staring directly at her. It was a child no older than 5 or 6, and it wore an old-fashioned night dress, tattered at the edges. Before Layla could scream, the figure vanished, as if it had been nothing more than a trick of the light. But the chill that ran down her spine told her it was real. Terrified, she ran back down the stairs and locked herself in the living room. She could feel the presence of the child lingering, watching her from the shadows. The whispers started again, but this time, they were louder, more urgent. "Help me! Layla!" The voice sounded so familiar, yet distant. Layla's mind raced. Was this some kind of prank, or was she losing her mind? Her grandmother had always talked about the house being alive in some way. She had never taken it seriously. But now, in the silence of the night, Layla couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The next morning, Layla decided to investigate. She couldn't live like this, jumping at shadows and listening to voices that didn't make sense. The house, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. She started by exploring the attic, a place she hadn't dared to go since moving in. The stairs creaked under her weight as she ascended into the dark, musty space. She pulled the string to turn on the light, and as the bulb flickered to life, she gasped. The attic was filled with old furniture, cobwebs, and dust, but there, in the far corner, was a small, wooden chest. Layla's heart skipped a beat. It was the same chest she had seen in her grandmother's room, but she had never seen it opened. Her grandmother had always been secretive about it, warning her never to touch it. But now, curiosity gnawed at her. She approached the chest cautiously, her breath shallow. As her hands touched the cold, weathered wood, a cold breeze swept through the room, making her shiver. With trembling hands, Layla lifted the lid. Inside, there were old photographs, faded letters, and a small wooden doll. Layla picked up the doll and felt a shiver run down her spine. It looked like a child's toy, but its eyes carved with precision stared back at her in a way that felt unnervingly real. She carefully sifted through the letters and photographs, searching for anything that could explain the strange occurrences in the house. That's when she found it. A letter from her grandmother, written in a hurried hand. "Layla, if you are reading this, it means the time has come. The child. It never left. The house has been holding onto it, keeping it trapped here. You must leave before it takes you too." Layla's blood ran cold. The letter went on to describe a tragic event from her grandmother's past, an accident in the house that had claimed the life of a child who, according to the letter, had never truly passed on. The house, it seemed, was haunted by the spirit of this child, and it had been waiting for someone with a connection to the family to release it. Trembling, Layla closed the chest and stumbled backward. She didn't know what to believe. Could the whispers, the figure, the cold presence, all be tied to this lost child, and if so, how could she get rid of it? That night, Layla decided to confront the spirit. She lit candles around the house, hoping to create a sense of calm. She sat in the living room, waiting, hoping that somehow, the child would come to her. As the clock struck midnight, the whispers returned. "Layla, help me." The child's voice was no longer distant. It was right there, in the room with her. Layla stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm here," she whispered. "What do you want from me?" The temperature in the room dropped, and the child appeared once more, standing by the fireplace. Its eyes locked with hers, pleading. "Help me, Layla. I'm lost. I need to go home." Tears welled in Layla's eyes as she stepped forward. She didn't know how to help, but she couldn't leave the child in torment. Slowly, she reached out her hand, and as her fingers brushed the cold air, she felt a sudden surge of energy, powerful, yet terrifying. The room seemed to spin as a bright light enveloped the child. Layla closed her eyes, feeling a rush of emotions: grief, fear, and then, finally, peace. When the light faded, the house was silent. Layla opened her eyes, and there, in the center of the room, stood the child, but this time, it was no longer a haunting figure. It was a small, peaceful being, smiling softly at her. "Thank you," it whispered, before fading away, leaving Layla alone in the quiet, empty room. The house was still. The whispers were gone. Layla felt a weight lift from her shoulders as she realized that the child had finally found peace. But the house, its silence felt different now. It no longer seemed alive with whispers, but instead, it felt empty. And as Layla walked through the house, she couldn't help but wonder, had she truly helped the child, or had something more sinister been released?